I don't know what's going on. Good afternoon. I'm Alli Joseph, and welcome to Salon Talks. Two-time Tony Award winner and stage actor Matthew Broderick has been making audiences laugh and feel since his Broadway run of the Brighton Beach Memoirs in 1983, I think, if I'm right, which I remember as a kid, so I'm dating myself here. And Broderick's acting canon is vast, and he has curated a unique career of varied and memorable characters. Now he's joined forces with multi-hyphenate director, stop me if I get this wrong, okay, I'm going to read it, writer, director, singer, songwriter. Is there anything else?
No, that's about it.
Can you gargle Eine kleine Nachtmusik or something like that? No?
You're outing me as a singer-songwriter.
I could do, oh, okay. Well, he's not a singer-songwriter anymore. He's a director now, and Shawn Snyder has written and directed a darkly funny and comedic, thoughtful film called To Dust, which opens in theaters February 8th, coming up. Both join me today to talk about the movie, which is a tragic comedy and explores the questions that many of us have about death, which are often complicated by religious beliefs. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming today. We have a little banging going on. I don't know what it is, but it blends into the scenery of it's New York, right?
Yeah.
So this is an uncomfortably funny and unusual premise, the film, which you'll tell us about. So Shawn, what prompted you to write this film?
There's lots of threads that came together. The earliest seeds of the idea and the original catalyst were planted when I lost my mom 10 years ago to cancer. It was 10 years in September. And I come from a Reform Jewish background, which is certainly not a Hasidic Jewish background, but nonetheless there's a timeline for grief and guideposts and guidelines through that grief. And I've always felt that those the Jewish way of grieving is incredibly profound and poignant and wise and well ancient, also incredibly intuitive in terms of our modern understanding of the psychology of grief. And it's very life-affirming even in the face of death, and allows for a period of sort of intense externalized mourning before trying to lead the bereaved back to the land of the living. And so I've always found that wonderful and beautiful, and yet nonetheless, when my mom passed away, from the vantage point and in the depths of that very specific grief, on one hand I felt, honoring my mom and mourning with my family and my community and some, personal spiritual ties to mourning in the Jewish way, but that my grief was spilling outside the boundaries of those confines and needed to express itself and grow and evolve. And I feel that 10 years later, I'm still on a pilgrimage of grief, but it's not something that I think is particularly depressive or something that I need to purge or get beyond. It's something that lives inside me and that evolves and that I'm actually grateful for in many ways. So the movie, it is sort of this exploration of the right to personal meaning, the right to honor someone who's been lost and to cope in a way that is befitting to the individual and to that specific relationship.
It is indeed a process. I lost my own mother to cancer 11 years ago, so we have certainly something in common there. And a primary part of her loss for me is the sadness about what she's missed, right? Both from family perspective, children, and also what's happening in the world. So working together on Tust, you both had, to Dust for, is there something in this grief process that you've both learned from losing your own loved ones that helped inform different parts of the film for you, Matthew?
Well, I don't know. I lost both my parents, so I win. It's a very deep thing that happens to people. Is there a question?
There is a question. The question is, did you tap into your own experiences with loss here,
right.
Even though this is obviously a spin, some of it is very funny, but it's a journey, as he says.
Yes, a bit. I mean, the character I play is sort of trying to avoid those feelings. Géza, the cantor, the Hasidic cantor, he's just lost his wife and he's miserable, and I sort of try to help him out of that. But I sort of avoid personal feeling about it in a way, the character does. So it's not like I was exactly exploring that.
But while being a lost soul with
definitely.
Some version of your own loss.
Absolutely, but he's the type who likes to not think about it seemed to me to, to not be thinking
He
about those
spends a lot of
things.
time with he's a bit of a stoner, right?
He's a stoner, and he likes Jethro Tull, and doesn't seem to like teaching, but he teaches, and I think he does have all those feelings. He just sort of hides them at first, anyway. And but certainly, working on the movie made me think about about death, frankly, and the movie delves into what happens to what is death physically too, which is something nobody likes to think about too much, but everybody's curious about it.
Exactly, and that's a part of why this has such relevance, I think, for anybody. There's, I was attracted a little morbidly to the science and decay that the characters study in this film, and for that reason, it might be difficult for some people to watch. But I was a sort of a former bio geek, and so, Shawn, you said that forensic anthropology really interested you, and you did a tremendous amount of research to put this together. Did you study it for the film?
I studied it for the film. The film was born of the research. It had all of these, components of my life that had been laid in and latent, and then they were all sort of unlocked. The organization, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which sponsors, not only funds a lot of scientific research, but actually funds what they call a mission statement, the public understanding of science through the arts. They're very generous, and they incubate projects that border along, have something to do with science. And I never felt innately that I had a scientific idea, but I realized that if one were to, I had these thoughts about my mom's body when she decomposed, hauntingly and conveniently. Jewish grief, that the timeline of Jewish mourning sort of offered this template to graft atop, I'm checking in at 7 days with where I'm feeling, but where's my mom's body? What's happening down there at 7 days, at 30 days? And I've never felt comfort at my mom's grave. But you have these sort of horrific nightmares, and I think as we all generally do, I repressed those and kind of ignored them. I didn't go crazy with them, but I do think that when you repress, things fester, and that's individually and that's societally. I think as a society and our cultures therein, we don't have a healthy relationship with death. So, but if one were, when the idea for the film occurred, I realized that if one were to engage that reality, it would, in essence, be a scientific question. And then you would put science in conversation with religion. And so I was simultaneously researching, kind of going down the rabbit hole of the Hasidic world, and not only the cultures and the trappings of it, but the ethos and Kabbalistic mysticism and the folklore of that world. And also at the same time, going down the rabbit hole of forensic anthropology, which I didn't know much about. I knew about, forensics and criminology. But I assumed that when I would set out on this idea, I might Google what happens to a body, and there would be a pretty simple answer, and there would be no drama. But what I found instead was this young and blossoming field of science that moves at this breakneck pace in terms of the discoveries that are made, and an infinite number of increasingly minute factors that affect how any given body is going to decompose. And it's fascinating. And my own descent into that research, I visited a body farm in Tennessee.
Those are real things, right? So if you're just joining us, this is, of course, Matthew Broderick and his director, Shawn Snyder, who have put together a very funny but dark film called To Dust, which comes out on February 8th. Is that nationwide or just here?
February 8th here in New York, February 15th in LA and beyond, and then we have release dates across the country into March.
Great, so you guys can check it out February 8th, but what he's referring to is a real anthropological study park. These do exist. I learned in the film and then read about it, that where they actually study decomposition and the different states that bodies break down in nature for science. And so what was the most, this is a little strange of a question, but I mean it's all relevant, what's the most interesting thing that you guys learned about how we decompose after death? And I imagine you may have absorbed some of this.
I did,
and you said fester before, so I just have to say, good, you used it in two other ways, and it's just oddly appropriate.
Well, I was surprised to learn that in some instances that, because I don't want to spoil, but the bodies that not much happens to them sometimes. In some situations, they would look pretty normal after.
And you
much
think
longer
it'd just
than
be
I
melted
thought.
down, right?
I thought it'd be a nice, hammer film skeleton
This is horrifying.
after about a week.
but
it's not.
It is fascinating.
And I read a book about forensic anthropology way before this. I actually did read a book. I think it was called Dead Men Do Tell Tales.
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I've
which is
actually
really
heard of
good
that. Yeah,
book.
fascinating.
And one thing I remember, this has nothing to do with the film, but you asked, is they found 2 blobs of silicone in the woods. And
well, you know where
and
those came from.
No, but the student said, "Are these jellyfish?" She could not figure it out. And the guy was like, "Those are breast implants.
He's not cosmopolitan.
They look perfect, apparently."
Well,
So
of course they do.
Your whole body goes away, and there's just 2.
The soul remains and
one fake
the silicone.
tooth.
One fake tooth. This is what I'm thinking. So in this age of so much cosmetic surgery and stuff
Yeah,
like that, I
that's the-
imagine I have had this thought, like everything breaks down, and if you were to look in a casket or in a grave, there's just this pile of metal and plastic.
Yeah, every bit of metal in you. I have
Just-
a bunch of.
You're going to look good then, Matthew.
Yeah.
Somebody could melt you down.
Even
and
after
sell
being
you.
cremated, they can sometimes figure out who it was just from the
Lord.
bits of metal that didn't melt.
Well, one thing you
It's
wrote,
cheery, isn't it?
It's just it's delightful. Are you guys enjoying this? This is really fascinating stuff. So if you're interested in anthropology and biology and of course chemistry and the breakdown of things in nature, this is fascinating to explore. But I also, it's clear that you explored some of these ideas at Harvard. You studied religion. Were you drawn to Jewish ideas about death and religious law in particular when you were there?
At Harvard, I was studying the comparative study of religion, and with my own background, obviously, Judaism factored into it, and it was both an intellectual study and also an excuse for my own sort of spiritual searching. I started to focus very much while I was there, not on any individual tradition, but on this idea of, let me sort of get academic and thesis-y, but religion in a postmodern world and sort of how in conversation with or outside of our own cultures of origins, we sort of create religions for ourselves and how we have a personal right for meaning. And with those religions, we build our own rituals around those. And that particular obsession has been not only a personal journey for myself, but has weaved its way throughout my artistic thematic fascinations and interests. And that's really what the thread to dust is, sort of this right to create our own rituals, to find our own meaning where we seek it.
And you said something interesting earlier that when you've gone to your mother's grave, and I don't know if this is the case for you, but it resonated with me because I felt the same. You go there and you don't feel anything, right? It's just a place because there's a sensibility that the person or maybe the soul is not there anymore. And a lot of people have questions about what happens to us when we die, which is why this should resonate with so many people. Do you both think that approaching it with humor, as you have here, though it's dark, might actually help some audiences reimagine or reframe their questions about death?
I think so. I mean, humor is spiritual for me. The catharsis through humor. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why the film ended up as humorous as it did, and sort of started out with a sense of dark comedy. But I think one is we're looking at these taboos. We were looking and exploring both imagistically and thematically these things and scientifically these things that are very, very difficult to acknowledge. And there's this Jewish tradition of humor and gallows humor and laughing in the face of tragedy and that felt only, it's sort of the sugar. Number one, I think it elevates the tragedy. I think that humor is human. I think that humor is humbling. And I think that it felt very necessary to stare, to shine the light into the darkness of these themes with a sense of humor, to be humble before it, and also to ease the audience into this very, you can come along with us, but you're going to laugh as well.
And obviously you don't have to understand Judaism to see this, but if you were raised in like a half, in my case, reform home, I believe as well, and I found some of the things you wrote very funny. I mean, with the superstitions and the stereotypes, and some of them were very relatable to me. I was trying to remember some of the Yiddish and some of the things that that I had growing up, that some of which I saw reflected here. Did any of that come up for you? Things that you learned as a kid, or?
Well, I was brought up pretty, not very religiously. I am half Jewish, but my mother. So
you would be Jewish.
Yes,
in the law.
I know, but I didn't grow up with a whole lot of religion, actually.
Me neither.
Be honest.
But we did a lot of the traditions.
Yes,
for the
and
elders,
I definitely
and that was
know
important.
the cultural. And I don't know. I get I'm Jewish. I don't know why.
Okay.
But
But that's the thing; it's sort of intrinsic here, right? And that
Yeah.
that definitely resonated with me. This has been compared to Dust has been compared to The Odd Couple in a way, and I saw those parallels very clearly. It's like a idiosyncratic buddy pick in a way, and it's been
Yeah.
compared that way. And so, since you did star in the Broadway production of the actual Odd Couple, what parallels about the sometimes peculiar nature of friendship between men could you draw between the two very different stories?
Yeah. Well, it's not so dissimilar. I mean, these Felix and Oscar have known each other a long time, so they have a history of bickering, and it's a little bit different. These are men who have not met. But it's other than that, it's actually much more similar than I would think. I mean, they're both equally inept in this story. I mean, neither of them know what they're looking for exactly or how to find it. So one thinks he has a handle on it, and the other doesn't, and that can switch. And that's a comic situation: two people trying to work themselves out of in a comedy, I don't know what they'd be working themselves out of.
Right.
But-
Well, here now
out of
they're
graves,
committing
out
crimes.
out of
and
the
graves.
grave. Also,
Yeah.
there's a rabbis. This sacrilegious, but it is a little bit funny sometimes. A long beard and some. There's a lot of comedies about dancing rabbis. It has nothing to do with that.
Mel
but
Brooks, by
Mel
all,
Brooks
by all
would think
means.
that
Yeah.
was funny, I guess, but
He would. I think he would as well.
not that there's anything funny.
Not that. No.
I know.
But I think you guys are digging yourself out of graves, but you also end up in these genres that you don't particularly belong in, and I think you're trying to dig yourself out of those too.
Yeah, and trying to communicate. We almost speak a different language, each of us. So it's just fun to watch them try to explain themselves to each other because they never quite seem to understand each other. Maybe in some deeper
Right,
level
but
they do.
what I observed, I thought, was that they come to have, much like Felix and Oscar, a kind of a grumpy reliance on each other.
Absolutely.
They each need something from the other, even though they don't
but
communicate.
they
that well.
realize that they know much more about each other than they thought.
And my writing partner Jason Begay and I, we're huge fans of genre and genre bending and genre subversion. But it's with great power comes great responsibility. Like it could be, you could mash genres together for cheap ends, as a gimmick, and we try to tread in a way that we only do so if it's going to be emotionally or thematically purposeful. And so I think we're taking things like B horror genre, but also certainly the buddy comedy, and saying, well, how is this also emotional? I think the fact that it, given the circumstances with, and the purpose and the reason with which you guys meet and what you impart on, the freshness of the relationship developing versus a long-term existing relationship, and the hope that this bizarre relationship will be cathartic and healing in some way. I think that, I say this about both of their performances, and you do certainly, when you put you alongside Géza, you have a straight man and comedic relief on its surface, but it's the ways that Matthew makes me cry and the ways that Géza makes me laugh that I particularly find beautiful in their performances and their dynamic.
It's a lovely compliment.
It is a lovely compliment.
You did an amazing job. I really felt the sort of the pain of the two men in different ways. Your character's divorced. He seems like
Absolutely.
kind of a lonely, curmudgeonly guy.
Yeah.
And then, Shmuel, the other character, is trapped in his in his religious community and unable to explore things that are troubling him. And so you've helped each other. What attracted you to the role of Albert?
Oh, well, initially I liked this script. I really enjoyed reading it, and I wanted to, and it was unexpected, and it seemed personal. Like written by a thoughtful human, not like a group. It seemed worthwhile, and I wanted to work with Géza because I had seen Son of Saul, and then when I met Shawn, so there were a lot of all those things go into, But what attracted me to the role, I guess, I don't always. It's more like I would read it and think, I don't really know how to do this, but it seems like there might be something. I don't always say I'm attracted to this because of this. I don't always know. I just sort of think, oh, I'll take a bite of that and see how that is. So you sort of, at least me, you sort of jump in, and then halfway through shooting it, you start to realize why you like the role.
And I imagine the script is paramount. I mean, you have
No,
to
that's
like
the
the
first
flow
thing.
of
You
the
have
story.
to like
Absolutely.
everything, the people and the material and then the writing. But I don't always know I don't know what it is. It's hard to explain what I would like about a role always until I've done it, at least a little bit of it.
Sure, absolutely.
And then I start to think, oh, this is fun. I get it now. But it doesn't
Was
always, I don't
the
always know
pig
ahead.
wrestling fun?
Pig wrestling was fun.
Pig wrestling.
Yeah,
it's
the pig-
macabre. It's a little sad.
It was
but
hard.
but
We
it's
could have
a-
used. We could have used another
ASPCA approved.
$2,000 for that.
Yeah,
Or Humane
not a-
Society
not-
approved.
No pig was harmed.
No,
but
no,
it-
the pig
yeah.
was extremely happy. I saw him, and he smiled the whole time, as pigs do.
He smiled and then he pooped.
He looked at
He,
me.
Everywhere.
he took a
It's
huge
a lovely-
shit the second he got on the stage,
It's a
basically.
lovely set, right?
Welcome. And in a basement, in a den we were shooting in.
Yeah, it had just been sold by a realtor, so
An enormous
God help the
pee.
people who move in.
Wow.
Yeah,
Like a
who moved in there
huge
after.
lake of pee.
You need a
came out of it.
cleanup, a real
Yeah.
cleanup crew on that kind of thing.
But he was a very good pig, very easy to work with, and
Was it Orson Welles that said never
No, it was
work?
not Orson
Who was it? Who was it that
I
said
think
never
it was-
work with children or
Like-
W.C. Fields.
W.C.
I think.
Fields.
Yes.
It's not Orson
Well, yeah, and you can add, rain machines and cemeteries to that mix. This film,
No.
accomplished,
The Hungarians.
Hungarians.
Yeah.
We took all the taboos and
There you go.
with miracles
Pigs,
and
rain
love.
machines.
Yeah.
Of course it was W.C. Fields. At least I didn't say Winston Churchill. It's like the things that go through my mind when we're sitting here. One last question before we wrap up. A central theme of the movie is, and you mentioned this when we began, how far humans will go to avoid seeing death as it really is, and decay in particular. And you've noted, though, Shawn, that there's a spiritual element to actually looking this decay and the dissolution in the face. Why is that?
Well, I think that there's first of all, a very personal element. I think we all have our own threshold, and I think that should we choose to, I say rabbit hole again, go down that rabbit hole, we shouldn't feel ostracized or strange for wanting to do so. And I think that, there's a lot of nuanced ways in which that science to me becomes poetic and becomes mystical and spiritual and beautiful. But even just on its surface, this notion of a limited amount of matter in the universe and left sort of unencumbered, unformaldehyded, in the ground and not in a vault of a casket. The way that that matter will become something else. And I don't know, myself where I exactly want to end up, but the idea of becoming a tree, seems particularly beautiful and profound and spiritual and almost, Kabbalistic and mystical in these strange intersections. Take the opportunity to plug. There's a nonprofit organization called the Order of the Good Death.
Is it like a Hemlock Society?
I don't. They do a lot.
Oh, all right.
They do a lot. They have funeral homes. It's about sort of. It's also called the death positive movement. It's about sort of reshifting and reconfiguring our cultural and personal relationships to.
There's so
to
many
death.
wars and stigmas
Good luck
against
with
it.
that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't want to die.
No, he's gonna be like Walt Disney. You can freeze you. Maybe
Yes,
this is
I
another
want to
movie.
be frozen. There's also composting now, I read recently.
There was an article in the New York
Human-
Times yesterday.
Yeah,
This
you
has been
can be
happening in the
composted.
Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
Okay,
In
well,
California, you can be composted.
all right.
I think ultimately the point is to each his or her own.
Absolutely.
And that's that's where we leave it.
So many options. So, did you think you would learn about this today? I actually didn't know the extent to which, and we can see why you went to Harvard. Many ideas to explore here. Thank you both for joining us. It's been really informational and interesting. These are the two talents from To Dust, of course, Matthew Broderick and Shawn Snyder.
And Géza Röhrig
And
in
Géza
his
Röhrig
absence.
in
Yeah.
spirit, not spirit. He's
Spirit.
alive. He's just not. He's just not here. That almost worked. And you can check out the film To Dust, a very thoughtful tragic comedy that comes out February 8th here in New York and then goes nationwide. And I think you guys are doing a Q&A tonight, right?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
At where was it?
JCC,
The JCC
Manhattan,
here in New
yeah.
York. If you're in
Sold
New York.
out.
It's sold out. Well, you can stand
Sold out.
outside and press your nose up against the window and hope to be made smarter by these two gentlemen. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, and we will see you again.